2 weeks before my wedding, my sister stood up during my bridal shower, pointed at me, and smiled. Then she told my fiancé, "You should ask her about the man she's been hiding." My mother didn't defend me. She folded her arms and added, "We've been trying to tell you the truth." The room went completely silent. Everyone looked at me, waiting for an explanation. I didn't say a word. Instead, my fiancé reached into his jacket, pulled out a single photograph, placed it on the table in front of my sister, and quietly asked, "You mean this man?" Suddenly, nobody spoke. "My name is Emma Reynolds, I'm 31 years old, and 2 weeks before my wedding, my sister stood up in front of everyone I loved, smiled, and tried to convince my fiancé that I had been secretly seeing another man." The strange part wasn't the accusation. It was that she looked absolutely certain she was right. And for a few terrifying seconds, almost everyone believed her. My sister, Chloe, is 3 years older than me. Growing up, people always compared us. She was outgoing. I was quiet. She loved being the center of attention. I preferred staying in the background. Somehow, even when life wasn't a competition, Chloe found a way to turn it into one. If I earned an award at school, she'd remind everyone she had won one first. If I got promoted at work, she'd casually mention someone who made more money. Nothing I accomplished could simply exist. It always had to be measured against something she'd done. Our mother never stopped it. She'd smile awkwardly and say the same sentence she'd been saying since we were children. "Just ignore your sister. That's how she is." Maybe that's how Chloe learned she never had to take responsibility for hurting people. I spent years avoiding conflict because keeping the peace seemed easier than fighting battles nobody wanted to admit existed. Then I met Daniel. We met in the least romantic place imaginable, a grocery store. I was struggling to reach a box of pasta on the top shelf when another hand grabbed it at exactly the same moment. We both laughed. He apologized even though neither of us had done anything wrong. That tiny moment somehow turned into coffee. Coffee became dinner. Dinner became long walks, weekend road trips, and conversations that lasted until 2 in the morning. Daniel wasn't flashy. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply dependable. If he promised something, he did it. If I had a difficult day, he listened before offering advice. For the first time in my life, I never felt like I had to prove I was enough. 3 years later, he proposed on a quiet hiking trail overlooking the lake where we'd had our first weekend getaway together. There wasn't a crowd. No photographer hiding in the bushes. Just the two of us. It was perfect. Wedding planning should have been exciting. For the most part, it was. Daniel's family welcomed me from the very beginning. His parents treated me like a daughter. His younger brother volunteered to help decorate the reception hall. Even his grandmother mailed handwritten recipes she wanted us to make after we were married. My family was different. Mom insisted on helping with every decision, but somehow every conversation turned into criticism. The flowers are too simple. The venue is too small. Maybe Chloe should help you choose your dress. Chloe never openly complained. Instead, she made little comments that slowly chipped away at my excitement. "White isn't really your color." I probably would have picked a different venue. "I hope Daniel isn't expecting anything too fancy." I smiled through all of it. Not because it didn't hurt. Because I refused to let anyone steal the happiness I'd waited so long to find. 2 weeks before the wedding, my bridesmaids organized a bridal shower at my aunt's house. The backyard looked beautiful. Fresh flowers covered every table. Soft music played through hidden speakers. Friends laughed while we opened gifts. For the first hour, everything felt perfect. Even Chloe seemed unusually pleasant. She complimented the decorations. She smiled in family photos. She even hugged me when I thanked everyone for coming. Looking back, that should have worried me. After lunch, my maid of honor stood up to begin a toast. She had barely spoken 3 sentences when Chloe suddenly interrupted. "Before we celebrate," she said loudly, "I think Daniel deserves to know something." Every conversation stopped. My smile faded. Daniel looked toward her, confused but calm. "What do you mean?" he asked. Chloe folded her arms. "I mean your fiancé hasn't exactly been honest." A nervous laugh escaped someone across the table. People assumed it was a joke. It wasn't. She looked directly at Daniel. Ask Emma about the man she's been hiding. The entire backyard went silent. I could actually hear the wind moving through the trees. Daniel looked at me, not accusingly, simply waiting. Before I could speak, Mom slowly stood beside Chloe. Her expression was serious. We've been hearing rumors for months. My heart dropped. Mom. She shook her head. I didn't want to believe them either. Guests exchanged uneasy glances. Someone quietly set down a coffee cup. My aunt looked completely stunned. One of my bridesmaids whispered, "What is happening?" Chloe took one step forward. "I've seen her meeting him. More than once." She looked at Daniel again. They've been keeping it a secret. The accusations hung in the air. No one knew what to say. I noticed several relatives staring at me, waiting for an explanation. But I didn't defend myself. Not because I was shocked, because I already knew exactly who Chloe was talking about. And I also knew something she didn't. Daniel reached over and gently squeezed my hand beneath the table. His face never changed. He didn't look angry. He didn't look betrayed. He looked almost amused. Then, without saying a single word, he reached inside the inner pocket of his suit jacket. Slowly, he removed one printed photograph. He placed it on the table directly in front of Chloe. Then he looked her in the eyes and calmly asked, "Are you talking about this man?" The color drained from Chloe's face. The confident smile she'd worn only seconds earlier disappeared completely. And suddenly, the loudest person in the backyard couldn't find a single word to say. No one moved. No one even reached for the photograph. Every pair of eyes shifted between Daniel's calm expression and Chloe's suddenly pale face. The confidence she'd carried only moments earlier had completely disappeared. Finally, my aunt leaned forward first. "What picture?" Daniel gently turned the photograph so everyone around the table could see it. A quiet gasp spread across the backyard. It wasn't a romantic photo. It wasn't a secret vacation. It wasn't evidence of an affair. It was a picture of me standing beside a gray-haired man outside a small coffee shop. The man had one arm around my shoulders. Both of us were smiling. Daniel looked at Chloe. "So, is this the man you're talking about?" She swallowed hard. "Why, yes." Daniel nodded once. "I thought so." Then he looked around the table. "This man's name is Michael Reynolds." Several relatives looked confused. Then Daniel quietly added, "He's Emma's father." Silence. Absolute silence. Mom's face instantly lost color. Someone accidentally dropped a spoon onto the patio. No one bent down to pick it up. Chloe stared at the photograph as though she'd never seen it before. "That's impossible," she whispered. Daniel calmly shook his head. "No. It's simply the truth." Every eye turned toward me. For years I'd imagined having this conversation. Just not like this. Not in front of 30 people. I took a slow breath. When my parents divorced, I began quietly. I was 12. The divorce wasn't peaceful. Mom received primary custody. I saw Dad less and less until eventually we stopped speaking altogether. I paused. It wasn't because I stopped loving him. It was because life became complicated. The backyard remained completely still. Even the children playing inside the house had somehow gone quiet. Daniel reached for my hand. "We reconnected about 9 months ago," he explained. "It happened completely by accident." I smiled faintly. I was leaving a bookstore when someone called my name. I turned around, and there he was. Older, grayer, looking just as nervous as I felt. Neither of us knew what to say. Finally he smiled and asked, "Would you have time for coffee?" I nodded. We talked for almost 4 hours. Not about the divorce. Not about blame. Just about life. The years we'd missed. The books we'd both started reading. The places we'd traveled. The ordinary moments we'd never shared. After that, we met once every few weeks. Coffee. Lunch. Walks through the park. Slowly, we started rebuilding something we'd both thought was gone forever. Daniel looked around the table. I knew from the very beginning. Someone asked, "You did?" He smiled. "Emma told me after our 3rd meeting. She didn't want any secrets between us." I squeezed his hand. I also asked him to keep it private, not because I was ashamed, because I wasn't ready. I wanted to tell my family after the wedding, when emotions weren't already running high, when there was time for honest conversations instead of arguments. Apparently, life had other plans. Daniel reached into his folder again. There are a few more things. He placed several papers beside the photograph. The first was my birth certificate, Michael Reynolds, father. The second was an old family photograph. I couldn't have been older than 6. Dad was carrying me on his shoulders while Mom stood beside us smiling. Then Daniel unfolded one final page. A handwritten letter. I have permission to read this, he said. He looked toward me. I nodded. He began reading. Dear Emma, if you're reading this, thank you for giving an old father another chance. Several relatives quietly wiped their eyes. Daniel continued. There isn't a single birthday I forgot. Not one Christmas I didn't think about you. I kept hoping life would eventually give us another opportunity to know each other again. His voice softened. These past months have been the happiest I've experienced in years. No matter what happens, thank you for letting me be your dad again. Daniel folded the letter carefully. No one spoke. Finally, my cousin looked directly at Chloe. So, you thought Emma was having an affair? With her own father? Chloe's face turned bright red. I didn't know. I looked at her. You never asked. She lowered her eyes. I saw you meeting him. You looked happy. I assumed.
No.
Daniel interrupted gently. You chose to assume. There's a difference. The backyard remained painfully quiet. Then my mother finally spoke. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. I believe the rumors. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. I should have asked you. I nodded sadly. Yes. You should have. One by one, the guests began understanding what had really happened. No secret relationship. No betrayal. Just a daughter quietly rebuilding a relationship with the father she'd lost years earlier. And a family that had accepted gossip before asking a single question. I thought the conversation was finally over. Then a chair scraped softly against the patio. Everyone turned. At the far end of the table, Mrs. Evelyn Harper, my late grandmother's closest friend and someone who had known my parents for over 40 years, slowly stood. She looked first at my mother, then at me. Finally, she took a deep breath and quietly said, Before anyone says another word, there's something all of you deserve to know about what really happened after that divorce. No one spoke after Mrs. Evelyn Harper stood up. At 81 years old, she wasn't the loudest person in the room.
She didn't need to be.
When Mrs. Harper spoke, people listened. She had known my grandparents before my parents ever met. She'd watched our family grow, celebrate birthdays, survive hardships, and eventually fall apart. She looked first at my mother. I've stayed quiet for too many years. Then she turned toward me. I'm sorry, Emma. My mother looked confused. Evelyn. Mrs. Harper gently raised her hand.
No.
It's time. The backyard became so quiet I could hear the fountain trickling beside the garden. When your parents divorced, she began, Michael never stopped asking about you. My chest tightened. He called. He wrote letters. He even asked me several times if I'd heard how you were doing. I slowly looked toward my mother. She stared at the ground. Mrs. Harper continued. Michael wasn't perfect. He made mistakes. But one thing he never stopped doing was loving his daughter. A tear rolled down my mother's cheek. I thought. She whispered. I thought staying apart would make things easier. Mrs. Harper sighed. Sometimes adults become so focused on protecting themselves, they forget who carries the consequences. No one argued, because no one could. Daniel quietly slipped his hand into mine. I squeezed it, not because I was afraid anymore, because I finally wasn't. Mom looked at me through tears. I should have told you every time your father asked about you. Her voice broke. I was angry. I convinced myself I was protecting you. I shook my head gently.
No.
You were protecting yourself. She closed her eyes. I know. Then Chloe stood. She looked nothing like the confident woman who had interrupted my bridal shower an hour earlier. I'm sorry. The words barely came out. I saw you meeting him. I saw how happy you looked. I didn't understand why. She swallowed hard, and instead of asking, I assumed the worst. She looked directly at Daniel. I wanted him to question you. Then she turned back to me. I think. She stopped, searching for the right words. I think I was jealous. Nobody interrupted. I kept watching your life come together. You found someone who truly loved you. You were excited about your wedding. And instead of being happy for you, I wanted some of that attention back. Her honesty surprised me, not because it erased what she'd done, because it was the first time she'd ever admitted why. Mom reached for my hand. I don't expect you to forgive us today. Dad wasn't there. He had passed away 2 years earlier. There would never be a conversation with him. Never an apology. Some chapters close without every question being answered. I had learned to accept that. I looked around the table. At my bridesmaids. My relatives. Daniel's parents. Everyone had spent the last hour waiting to see whether this family would fall apart completely. Instead, I took a slow breath. I forgive both of you. Mom immediately began crying again. Chloe covered her face. But forgiveness isn't permission to pretend this never happened. Both of them nodded. Trust doesn't come back because someone says sorry. It comes back because people choose differently. Daniel smiled softly beside me. Mrs. Harper smiled too. I hope, I continued, that today becomes the beginning of something better. Not perfect, just honest. The conversation ended quietly. There were no dramatic hugs. No applause. Just people slowly choosing truth over pride. 2 weeks later, I stood outside the small white chapel wearing the wedding dress I dreamed about since I was a little girl. The doors opened. Music filled the room. I looked toward the entrance. Standing beside me was my father, Michael Reynolds. He smiled nervously. You ready? I laughed through happy tears. I've waited a long time for this. So have I. He gently offered me his arm. Together, we walked down the aisle. Halfway to the altar, I looked at Daniel. He wasn't watching the guests. He wasn't looking at the decorations. He was looking only at me, the same way he always had, with complete trust, complete certainty. When I reached him, he whispered, "Worth the wait." I smiled. More than you'll ever know. As the ceremony ended and our families gathered for photographs, something felt different. Not because every relationship had suddenly become perfect, but because every important truth was finally out in the open. Months later, my mother and Chloe slowly began rebuilding what had been broken. Not through promises. Through consistency. Phone calls. Honest conversations. Showing up when they said they would. Trust returned one small step at a time. Looking back now, people often ask if I regret staying silent when my sister accused me. I always give the same answer.
No.
Because the truth doesn't become stronger when you shout it louder. Sometimes all it needs is patience. One photograph. And someone who loves you enough to believe you before asking a single question. That's the kind of trust every marriage deserves. And it's the greatest wedding gift Daniel and I ever received.